They say some roads lead to big cities, and some lead to places no one ever comes back from. In Texas, there is a stretch of Interstate 45 that terrified locals for years. It's an ordinary road between Houston and Galveston. Asphalt, roadside cafes, gas stations, open fields. Thousands of cars pass along it every day. People drive to work, to vacations, to visit relatives. From the outside, there's nothing unusual about it. But just beside this road, bodies were found for decades. Young women, teenage girls. Some disappeared without a trace, some were found months later, and some were never even identified. Locals began to call this area by a simple name, the Texas Killing Fields, Fields of Death. This is Nexiya, and this is the story of a road that took lives for years. In the 1970s, girls began disappearing along Interstate 45. At first, the cases seemed unrelated. Someone left home and never returned. Someone hitchhiked. Someone vanished after meeting friends. Police didn't see a connection between the stories. Different cities, different victims, different circumstances. But then the bodies started to appear. They were found in remote fields, abandoned lots, near canals and thick brush. Places people rarely visited and usually discovered only by accident. Almost all of these locations were close to Interstate 45. Behind the dry police reports and statistics were real lives. Every body found in those fields once had a name, a family, dreams, and ordinary daily worries. Lori Miller was only 16. In September 1984, she left home to buy something at a nearby store. It was a familiar route she had walked dozens of times. She told her mother she would be back soon, then disappeared around the corner. But Lori never came home. A few days later, her body was found in the empty fields near the highway. From that moment on, her family's life was divided into before and after, and her father spent years trying to find answers on his own. 13 years later, the story repeated itself. 17-year-old Jessica Kane left home to walk to a nearby store. A short trip that seemed completely safe, but that day, she never returned. Her family waited. Her phone stayed silent. Police began the search. Only months later, her body was found in the same fields near Interstate 45, a place already being called the Killing Fields. Christy Williams was only 13. She was a child just beginning to grow up, dreaming about the future, still believing the world around her was safe. One day, she simply walked out of the house, and no one ever saw her alive again. Later, her body was found in the same area where other victims had appeared for years. Her story became one of the most painful in the case because it showed something terrifying. The killer didn't stop even for children. 15-year-old Audrey Lee Cook disappeared after an argument with her family. She left home to calm down, like teenagers sometimes do. No one thought that walk would be her last. A few days later, her body was found in the fields near the highway. Her killer was never identified. For her loved ones, it became another story without answers, one of many in that area. Shelley Sykes was 19. She worked as a waitress, made plans for the future, and lived the ordinary life of a young woman. One day, she didn't come home. Later, her body was found in a remote area. A suspect appeared in her case, but even that didn't bring her family a true sense of justice. These stories were different. Different years, different circumstances, different lives. But they were all connected by the same place, a narrow stretch of land along Interstate 45, where the bodies of young girls and women were found for years. The bodies were discovered in different conditions. Some had been lying in the fields for only a few days, others for months. Sometimes police didn't find bodies at all. only bones scattered in the tall grass. Some victims were found without clothing, suggesting sexual violence. Others showed signs of strangulation or severe beatings. But because of decomposition, the exact cause of death was often impossible to determine. And each new discovery only strengthened the feeling that this was not a coincidence, that somewhere nearby there was someone who knew these fields far better than the police, and that this road was hiding far more secrets than it seemed at first glance. From the outside, it looked ordinary: overgrown land, drainage canals, tall grass, a few nearby roads. Nothing that could reveal a dark history. But it was there that the remains of several girls were found. Investigators began to suspect that these crimes might be connected, and that a serial killer could be operating along this highway. But there wasn't enough evidence. Different counties had different police departments. The cases were stored separately, and information was not always shared between them. Each department investigated its own victim, and while detectives tried to understand what was happening, the girls kept disappearing. Many of the victims were teenagers. Some came from troubled families. Some disappeared after running away from home. Others were involved in prostitution or simply ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. This made the investigations even more difficult. Disappearances like these were often not treated as urgent threats. Searches could move more slowly. Sometimes it was assumed the girls had simply left voluntarily. But when the bodies started to appear, it became clear these were not runaways, these were murders. Over the years, investigators began to realize that more than one person could have been responsible. The circumstances of the disappearances were too different. The time span was too long. Bodies were found in different years, at different distances from each other, and sometimes decades after the victims had disappeared. It began to look less like a single series of murders, and more like a corridor of crimes where different killers may have operated at different times. One of the first suspects investigators focused on was Clyde Hedrick. In 1984, he was convicted of the murder of 20-year-old Sandra Stidham. Her body was found near the same fields. The court found him guilty, but investigators suspected it might not have been the only murder in his life. His name appeared more than once in investigations of other disappearances connected to the area, but there was never enough direct evidence to bring new charges. Another known criminal linked to the area was Edward Harold Bell. In 1993, he shot and killed Larry Dickens and received a life sentence. But while in prison, Bell began sending letters claiming that he had murdered 11 girls in the past. He called them imperfect and described the killings as his personal mission. Some of his confessions matched real disappearances near the highways and fields, but investigators were never able to fully confirm his claims. Bell died in prison, taking most of the answers with him. Another name that appeared from time to time in the case files was William Lewis Reese. He was arrested in 1997 after kidnapping a woman in Texas. Later, he confessed to several murders, including crimes connected to women whose bodies were found near Interstate 45. In 2016, he was officially charged with the murder of one of the victims from the area. Investigators believe he may be responsible for other cases as well, but the exact number of his victims is still unknown. Another name often mentioned in connection with these areas is Dean Corll, one of the most brutal serial killers in Texas, later known as the Candyman of Houston. In the 1970s, he and two teenage accomplices abducted boys from poorer neighborhoods, luring them with promises of parties, money, or work. According to investigators, there were at least 28 victims. They were tortured and then killed, after which the bodies were buried in remote locations, including areas not far from the same regions where the remains of girls would later be found. In 1973, one of his accomplices shot Coral and confessed to the police, after which mass graves began to be uncovered. Although most of Coral's victims were boys, his story became another chilling reminder. These places had long been used by criminals as territory where the darkest secrets could be hidden. Over time, investigators came to the conclusion that the so-called Texas killing fields were not the work of a single serial killer. It was a place where different criminals may have operated in different years. Some of them were caught, some died in prison, and others remain completely unknown. And that is what makes this story even more frightening, because in these fields, victims may have been left by people whose names were never spoken in court, and some of them may have never faced any punishment at all. In 1991, the remains of 4 more women were found in the same area. 2 of them were never identified. This once again confirmed that these were not isolated incidents. It was something bigger. Journalists began writing about the road of death. Television crews filmed reports. Local residents started to fear this highway. Parents stopped letting their daughters walk alone, and hitchhiking became something dangerous, almost forbidden. But even with all the publicity, many of the cases remained unsolved. For the families of these girls, the story never ended. While the news spoke about a series of crimes and deserted fields near the highway, for them these were not cases or victims, but their daughters, sisters, and friends. Some parents spent years putting up flyers, calling hospitals and morgues, and driving to the places where bodies had been found. They met one another, formed groups, supported each other at meetings, and together demanded new searches and reviews of old case files. For them, it was not just a fight for justice, it was an attempt to return names to those the world had almost forgotten, and to finally get the answers they had waited for years. In the 2000s, new technology brought a sense of hope. DNA analysis allowed investigators to re-examine old evidence. Some victims who had remained unidentified for decades finally received their names. Families learned the truth after 20, sometimes even 30 years. But the main question remained unanswered. How many killers were there really? Some investigators believe this was the work of several different people. Interstate 45 runs through major cities, industrial areas, and ports. It is a place where thousands of cars pass every day, an ideal location for someone looking for victims and then disappearing, an ideal place to dispose of a body and drive away. In the 2000s, federal investigators became interested in the case again. The FBI created a special task force to investigate the murders along I-45. They began gathering old cases into a single database, comparing evidence and searching for common details. But many traces had already disappeared. Witnesses had died or forgotten important details. Crime scenes had changed. Some of the fields where bodies were once found are now covered with houses. The roads have been widened. The landscape has changed, as if the land itself was trying to erase these stories. Despite decades of investigations, the story of the Texas killing fields still has no full ending. Some of the crimes were linked to specific suspects, but a large number of cases remain unsolved. And some victims remained unidentified even by name for many years. Only in recent years, thanks to modern DNA technology and genealogical databases, investigators have been able to identify several girls whose remains were found decades ago. detectives continue to review old files, compare evidence, and try to connect the scattered pieces into one clear picture. For the families of the victims, this has meant years of waiting, years without truth, and years without justice. Some mothers did not live long enough to see their daughters identified. Some fathers died without ever learning what had happened to their children. Over time, the story of the Texas killing fields went far beyond police reports and became part of popular culture. Several documentaries and feature films were made about these events, trying to recreate the atmosphere of fear that surrounded this highway for years. In 2011, the feature film The Texas Killing Fields, inspired by real events, was released. Later, documentary projects followed, including the series The Killing Fields and other television investigations. Journalists, filmmakers, and writers have returned to this story again and again, trying to understand how the same place could become a symbol of dozens of unsolved crimes. For many true crime viewers and listeners, this case became one of the most disturbing in the United States, not because of one specific killer, but because of the feeling that these fields hide an entire series of mysteries that may never be solved. And the road still exists. Cars drive along it every day. People listen to music, talk, and think about their own lives. And almost no one remembers that not far from the asphalt, bodies were once found. The Texas killing fields became a symbol of more than just brutal crimes. They became a symbol of cases that never received answers, a symbol of girls whose names remained unknown for years, a symbol of families who waited for a call from the police for decades, and a symbol of how easily a person can disappear if they end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And what do you think? Was this the work of one killer or several different people who were never connected to each other? Write your opinion in the comments. This was Nexiya. See you in the next story.